attack in London.
Hatred and evil of this kind will never succeed.
A man is arrested on suspicion of terror after driving a van into a crowd near a mosque.
A member of the president's outside legal team says the president is not under investigation. I'm Mark Irons at the White House. I'll bring you the latest.
Political test. A last-minute push for votes in the most expensive House race in U.S. history. Heading south, the Vatican announces the first Latin American pope in history will visit his home continent. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, June 19th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. British authorities move quickly to ease concerns of Muslim worshippers after a man plows his vehicle into a crowd as they were leaving a London mosque. Police are treating the incident as a terror attack. National security correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. U.S. State Department officials here are condemning the attack and offering aid to their British counterparts. The offer comes as British media have identified the suspect, 47-year-old Darren Osborne, who was a father of 4 living in Wales. Osborne was driving a van that apparently swerved into a group of Muslim worshippers, injuring 9 people.
Just after midnight, a van plows into a crowd of people leaving the Finsbury Park Mosque as Muslims celebrate the holy month of Ramadan.
I broke my fast in the mosque. I went to the shop, I came back, and then after I just see pandemonium, I see a white van, I see people screaming.
The guy, after doing what he did, he was shouting, "I did my bit, and you deserve it," and stuff like this. And thanks for our Imam, Muhammad Mahmoud, who went quickly and grabbed the guy.
London police say a 47-year-old man was arrested at the scene. Authorities believe he acted alone. Prime Minister Theresa May is now calling for a special commission to address extremism in Britain.
It was an attack that, once again, targeted the ordinary and the innocent, going about their daily lives.
It comes on the heels of 3 terror attacks within months. In March, a man hit pedestrians on Westminster Bridge in London, killing 5. On June 3rd, a van rammed into a crowd on London Bridge, killing 8. And on May 22nd, a suicide bombing outside a concert in Manchester, killing 22. Today, faith leaders in London held a moment of silence and called for unity.
An attack on one faith is an attack on all faith and communities.
Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the president of the Catholic bishops in England, added his voice, saying in part, "Violence breeds violence. Hatred breeds hatred. Every one of us must repudiate hatred and violence from our words and actions. We must all be builders of understanding, compassion, and peace, day by day, in our homes, our work, and our communities."
Some British security officials, speaking anonymously, say hate crimes directed at Muslims have increased nearly 5-fold in the wake of the recent attacks. The country's terror alert level is at severe, meaning that security officials believe an attack is highly likely. Lauren?
This mosque has made headlines before, Wyatt. What do you know about it?
That's right, Lauren. The Finsbury Park Mosque was associated with extremist ideology for several years after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, but it was shut down and reorganized. Now its current leaders say they support interfaith dialogue and want to serve the nearby community in North London. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. We're also following an apparent terror attack in Paris. A man rammed a car into police vehicles in the Champs-Élysées shopping district, prompting a fiery explosion. Police found a handgun on the driver, who was badly burned and died. Police identified that suspect as a 31-year-old man from a Paris suburb who was known as an extremist. Investigations into Russian meddling of the 2016 election are moving forward, but a member of the president's outside legal team says despite reports and the president's own words, he is not under federal investigation. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump has repeatedly referred to the investigation itself as a witch hunt, and he has also stated, quote, "I am being investigated." But his personal attorney, Jay Sekulow, says that's not the case.
As I said all weekend, there's been no notification to any of us that the president is under any investigation.
Trump attorney Jay Sekulow clarifying this tweet from the president. I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt. Sekulow says that the president was referring to a Washington Post report which cites 5 sources who only spoke on the condition of anonymity. The story claims the president is under investigation for obstruction of justice in the Russian probe, but his attorney says the newspaper's allegation is false.
It was manufactured from the Washington Post. All the president did was respond to the Washington Post through his social media platforms.
Sekulow's defense echoes the congressional testimony of fired FBI Director James Comey, who stated President Trump was not the center of the probe. In a series of tweets over the past week, the president repeatedly uses the phrase witch hunt. But the president is beefing up his private legal team, adding attorney John Dowd, a former prosecutor best known for his investigating baseball player Pete Rose.
Thank you.
The president has expressed frustration at both special counsel Robert Mueller and the man who appointed Mueller, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, for linking him to the investigation. Senator Marco Rubio says he doesn't expect Trump to interfere in the probe.
Let's find out what happened, let's put it out there, and let's not undermine the credibility of the investigation.
President Trump denies that he has any criminal ties to Russia or that he has made any attempt to block the investigation. Today's White House press briefing was off camera, but Press Secretary Sean Spicer says information may come later this week on whether President Trump has recordings of his meetings with fired FBI Director James Comey. Lauren.
The U.S. shoots down a Syrian fighter jet near ISIS's self-declared capital of Raqqa. The Pentagon says the Syrian plane was bombing U.S.-backed forces on the ground. It's the first time the U.S. has shot down a Syrian plane. Syria calls it flagrant aggression and said it was targeting ISIS. Iran launches a ballistic missile for the first time since 1988, targeting ISIS in Syria. Iran says it's not only a response to the deadly terror attack in Tehran, but also sends a message to Saudi Arabia and the U.S. The last time Iran launched a missile was during the Iraq-Iran war. 7 U.S. Navy sailors died Saturday after a collision between the USS Fitzgerald and a Philippine container ship off the coast of Japan. The sailors were considered missing until their bodies were found in a flooded section of the destroyer. A raging wildfire in central Portugal is blamed for at least 63 deaths, including a firefighter. Hot weather, as well as strong winds and dry conditions, fueled the fires around the country. More than 2,700 firefighters are on the front lines. Portugal is observing 3 days of national mourning after the deaths.
Al caro popolo portoghese, per l'incendio devastante.
Pope Francis led thousands of people at the Vatican in silent prayer for the victims of the Portugal fires. The tragedy comes just over a month since the Holy Father visited the country's Fatima shrine. An update to the massive apartment fire in London. Police say 79 people are now believed to have died, making it the deadliest blaze in recent British history. Authorities spent the weekend working with families to identify the missing. There is no evidence the fire was started deliberately. However, a criminal investigation is underway.
Holy, holy, holy Lord, God of hosts.
Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the Archbishop of Westminster, urged the faithful on Saturday to make the anger following the apartment disaster a source of determination. Speaking at a church in West London, the Cardinal also talked about the emotional burden some of the first responders will have to live with for the rest of their lives. He appealed to everybody to pray for them. Pope Francis urges Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany to fight for the Paris climate deal. The Holy Father met with Merkel at the Vatican on Saturday ahead of July's G20 summit in Hamburg. For more on what the two leaders discussed, we are joined by our Vatican correspondent, Mary Shevlin. Mary, this is Angela Merkel's 4th visit with Pope Francis. Is he finding a good ally in the German Chancellor?
Lauren, it seems so. The two leaders have many common concerns, which is clear in the Vatican communique about the meeting. The statement revealed that they spoke about questions that they share an interest in, with particular consideration giving to the upcoming G20 meeting in Hamburg. They agreed on the need to dedicate more attention of the international community towards these important issues like counteracting poverty, hunger, the global threat of terrorism, and of course, climate change. And so they're really finding common ground on which to move forward with together.
President Trump's decision to withdraw from that Paris climate change deal was a very unpopular decision worldwide. Is her visit to the Vatican in a way for her to drum up support for it?
It certainly seems that this was the very reason, Lauren, for this meeting, because Merkel and Francis have already met several times, as you mentioned, in the past. And here we are just 3 weeks out from the G20 meeting that she's hosting in Germany. So it does seem deliberate, her being here. Speaking to the press after her meetings with the Pope, the Chancellor said Pope Francis had encouraged her to uphold the 2015 Paris Agreement on combating climate change, even though the United States, as she put it, quote, regrettably left the agreement. So I think she got what she wanted from this trip, and I think Pope Francis, for his part, was happy to help if it means promoting the fight against climate change, the fight against poverty, the fight against terrorism.
Well, there are Catholics who disagree with this climate change plan, but Pope Francis is very much in favor of it.
He is. As when President Donald Trump came, he took the opportunity to give him a copy of this environmental encyclical, Praised Be, Laudato Si, which casts fighting climate change as a moral imperative. He did the same with Angela Merkel, gave her a copy as well. Now, we have to remember that Francis wrote this encyclical ahead of the Paris deal because he really wanted to urge the global consensus for this need to fight climate change, this perverse development, as he called it, that has enriched the wealthy at the expense of the poor and turned God's creation into an immense pile of filth, as the document reads.
Thank you so much. Mary Shovelin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
News about Pope Francis. He's heading south to South America. The Vatican says the Holy Father will visit Chile and Peru in January. Stops include Chile's capital, Santiago, and the Peruvian capital, Lima. The trip will come a few months after he is going to visit Colombia. Pope Francis is from Argentina. Coming up, 2 candidates, 1 congressional seat. It's the most expensive House race in history, where they stand on abortion. And war on terror. The U.S. role fighting extremists in the Philippines. The Supreme Court issues a series of rulings today covering everything from offensive trademarks to dancing babies. Justices ruled the government can't refuse to register trademarks that are considered offensive. Washington Redskins owner Dan Snyder said he's thrilled about the decision since his team faced pressure to change its name. The dancing baby refers to a long-running copyright dispute over a YouTube video that shows a baby dancing to Prince's song, Let's Go Crazy. The justices cleared the way for a trial in a lawsuit filed by the baby's mother against Universal Music. A victory for pro-life in Georgia as the state's highest court rejects a challenge to a law banning most abortions after 20 weeks. The law had been on hold since 2012 when the ACLU filed suit. It bans doctors from performing abortions 5 months after an egg is fertilized, except when a fetus has a defect so severe it is unlikely to live. The law also makes an exception to protect the life or health of the mother, but not for cases of rape or incest. In just hours, Georgia voters will decide the winner of the most expensive House race in U.S. history. The debate over Planned Parenthood heated up this election, which is seen as a test for Republicans who want to keep control of Congress. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi explains why this race is so important. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. It's a sprint to the finish line for an open house seat here at the Capitol. It became available after Tom Price resigned to become Health and Human Services Secretary. Republicans have held on to the seat since 1979 when Newt Gingrich came into power. But this year, the race is very tight.
I'm John Ossoff, and I approve this message.
30-year-old Democrat John Ossoff defends Planned Parenthood in his ads.
If Karen Handel didn't want to fund Planned Parenthood, she didn't have to take the job at Susan G. Komen.
Republican Karen Handel was vice president of that breast cancer organization. Now pro-life groups like Georgia Life Alliance back her up.
Planned Parenthood does not do mammograms. And so she determined that that was not an effective grant, an effective use of the funds. And so she defunded Planned Parenthood, at least as far as Susan B. Komen was concerned.
Ossoff is a former congressional staffer and documentary filmmaker. He paints himself as a centrist who can work with President Trump.
I don't expect a congratulatory tweet from the president if I win. I'm not sure he's my biggest fan, but I sincerely hope he exercises sound judgment in the leadership of the country, and I hope to have the opportunity to work with him on the potential issues of mutual interest for this community.
While Ossoff hasn't held office, Handel was Georgia's Secretary of State.
It's a difference between my opponent, who likes to talk about what he's going to do, and me, someone who has actually done it.
This race is seen as a referendum on President Trump, and leaders from both parties have hit the campaign trail.
If it's right, she'll stand up for it. If it's wrong, you better watch out.
This race will send a message to America and to people not only here in Georgia, but to America and around the world.
This race gives Democrats a chance to show that they can flip a Republican-held seat then in their attempt to reclaim control of the House when every seat is up for a vote. Next year, both Handel and Ossoff have full schedules of events around the district today in just a few more hours until it all ends. Lauren?
It's the most expensive House race in U.S. history, as we've said. Where is all of that money coming from?
Lauren, a total of $50 million. Democrat Ossoff's money has come from donors from California, more from California, New York, and Massachusetts than even from Georgia, while Republican Handel has seen Speaker Ryan, a Speaker Ryan-backed group, spending $7 million on her behalf.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. There are fears ISIS is spreading even more in Asia. Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are joining forces to fight militants who have laid siege to a southern Philippine city. Since May, more than 200,000 residents of Marawi have had to leave their homes as fighting between troops and ISIS continues. Officials say 26 civilians have been killed in 3 weeks. Members of Congress, including Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, are expressing concern. And joining us now is Travis Tritton. He's the national defense, national security reporter for the Washington Examiner. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
So, Travis, the U.S. is about, 50 to 100 special forces working in this advise and assist role in the Philippines. What should it be? Is that enough?
Well, it's very interesting because the U.S. had about 500 or 600 special operators there after 9/11, and we kept them there for over a decade. But several years ago, we pulled them out of the Philippines and ended the mission there, and we just left this very small contingent force. And now what we're seeing is really an increase in the violence there. So I think that that is all under question right now.
Well, we can only put our troops in so many different places. We have a leader there, a new leader, Duterte, the president, and I think that he has had some tough rhetoric, too, as well, for all of these folks. What I'm interested in, though, is the role of the Catholics in the persecution there. 85% of the Philippines is Catholic, and the Muslims are helping Christians escape by allowing them to wear hijabs. How prevalent was that when you were reporting there, and how important is this?
Yeah, the Philippines is definitely a Catholic country, but they have their concentration of Muslims in the southern part of the country. And we are seeing reports, some pretty harrowing reports from Marawi about Christians, Catholics being targeted by these rebels, going house to house, door to door, asking people to recite the Quran, and possibly executing those who can't do that.
He's declared martial law across the southern region to control the terror. Is that working?
Well, I think we've yet to see whether that's going to work, whether that's an effective strategy there. The Philippines have been trying to deal with this insurgency for a long time, and they've really struggled with it. And now we're seeing it really coming back and surging. So it's going to take some measures, some new measures to get it under control.
Experts say the government is partly to blame for the rise of terror. Is that true, based on your reporting?
Well, again, the Philippines have struggled for generations with this Muslim separatist movement. And again, I think that what we're seeing now is the influence of the Islamic State. I think it's inspiring these groups to come together, to band together. It's emboldened them. And we've seen this attack on morality, which really is one of the largest attacks in recent memory.
Travis Tritton, defense and national security reporter for the Washington Examiner. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, a tradition dating back centuries. We'll take you to the streets of Rome. And an unusual sight at the New York Stock Exchange. A developing story tonight. An American college student freed by North Korea last week has died. Otto Warmbier was 22 years old. The family says the awful, torturous mistreatment their son received at the hands of the North Koreans ensured that no other outcome was possible. Warmbier was convicted of subversion and sentenced to 15 years in prison with hard labor after confessing a year and a half ago he tried to steal a propaganda banner. North Korea has not acknowledged whether or not he was tortured, but we do know thousands of people in the country who have been, simply for their faith. Joining us now is Vernon Brewer, President and CEO of World Help, a Christian humanitarian organization helping poor communities around the world. Vernon, terrible news.
It is, and our hearts and prayers go out to his parents during this very difficult time.
You have been there. You have been to North Korea. You know firsthand the kind of torture that happens there. Tell us about that.
In fact, Lauren, right now, today, there are 70,000 Christians, not just Christians, that are imprisoned in political labor camps. They're tortured, they're beaten, some with electric stun batons. Some of them are beaten until they too are in comas. Every day, 70,000 Christians are tortured in North Korea.
And why aren't we doing anything about this?
Well, you know,
you are, World Help is, but what about the UN? What about the United States?
You know, Otto's parents were promised for a year that something would be done, and nothing was done. And it's time for Christians to speak up and to say something. And it's no longer okay just to be shocked. Now, it's time to get involved. And at World Help, we're working in North Korea to provide humanitarian aid. We call it Help for Today and Hope for Tomorrow. Humanitarian aid to meet their needs of food and clothing and medicine, and then spiritual needs with Hope for Tomorrow to provide Bibles. And we've provided over 100,000 copies of the Bible for North Korean Christians just recently.
How do you do that if people are being tortured for their religion?
It's done very secretively, and they are not printed in the country. They're brought in, and Christians take a great risk by receiving one. They have to keep it hidden. They have to worship in private and in secret, but they're doing it every day.
It is a remarkable testament to them to continue their faith under such circumstances. What do you think needs to be done to stop the torture?
You know, our own partner there in North Korea was arrested. He was charged with espionage, and they kept him for 240 days. He was beaten regularly every day, tortured. I can't even explain the atrocities that he went through. And he was finally released. He was convicted of being a follower of Jesus Christ. And when they released him from prison, he was a broken man with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And his life is in pieces now because of the torture and the oppression.
As will the family of Otto Warmbier. They will never, ever get over this tragedy.
For 16 years in a row, North Korea has been ranked #1 as oppressing Christians worldwide. They're the #1 oppressor of Christians in the world, and we need to pray for the Christians in North Korea. World Help is trying to be the hands and feet of Jesus on the ground in North Korea.
Vernon Brewer, President and CEO of World Help, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you, Lauren.
A relic of St. John Bosco, stolen earlier this month, has been recovered. An urn containing the saint's brain was taken June 3rd from the Basilica of John Bosco near Turin, Italy. The suspect is reportedly a 42-year-old man with a criminal record. He had planned to sell the relic. Our news partners have more on this story. You can read it at CatholicNewsAgency.com. And a familiar face at the New York Stock Exchange this morning. It's New York's Cardinal Timothy Dolan. He rang the opening bell at the start of trading, surrounded by members of Catholic Charities from the Archdiocese. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We are going to leave you tonight with the Corpus Christi procession through the streets of Rome. It was a beautiful event yesterday. I'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night, and God bless you.